Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story.
The open relationship that blew up in my face. My ex-girlfriend suggested we try an open relationship, but she completely lost it when I didn't end it on her terms. You're saying I can hook up with whoever I want? Well, okay, let's see how that goes. Anyway, this is a true story, and it's been a while since we last spoke. If you look back at our old email thread, you'll see that I reached out to you 2 years ago, asking for advice about whether I should go to college or a trade school. I ended up choosing trade school, and now I'm a certified welder. Currently, I'm enrolled in the diving academy to get certified for underwater welding. Fun fact, I used to be on the high school swim team, though that doesn't help much now. What really matters are the diving certifications. But, I'm set with job prospects since my dad's best friend and his cousin are both underwater welders. I'll be moving to Virginia soon. Thanks for all your advice, by the way. It's cool to see you're still making videos. Now, even though I've followed your channel for years, and especially leaned on it a couple of years back, I still believed in relationships. I genuinely thought I'd find that rare, perfect partner, my unicorn. Turns out, that kind of relationship doesn't seem to exist. My first girlfriend, and probably my last, actually hit me with the suggestion of having an open relationship. I was in total disbelief. But I agreed to it, and sure enough, she completely flipped out and went nuts. We just broke up this past summer, and things really went south around the 4th of July. So, back in May, we had been together for a year and a half. When we first got together, everything was going great. She was super interested in my job. Like I mentioned, I was working as a welder back then, and still am now, just working on certifications and leveling up. My family's been helping me out too, so I'm managing. But yeah, she was all ears when I talked about welding. I work for a structural iron and steel company, and while I'm not at the top earning the big bucks like the guys who've been here forever, I'm making decent money. But man, when I get into underwater welding, it's going to be a game changer. This is one of those industries where it's not just about your skills, you've got to know the right people, and luckily, I do. Anyway, I would go on about my work, and she loved it. She thought underwater welding was fascinating, and she used to say it was sexy that I was so determined and knew exactly what I wanted in life. I think that's part of why she fell for me. We started dating, and things were really good. She was kind of on the fence about what she wanted to do with her life, though. Half of her wanted to become a nurse, and the other half wanted to be a nail technician. She told me about this dream of opening a nail salon and offering other services like eyelash extensions, massages, stuff like that. It wasn't really my thing, but if that's what she wanted, I was all for it. Early on, like 3 months into our relationship, she wanted to move into my apartment. She kept saying it would prove we were exclusive, like this was a committed, monogamous relationship. I told her I got what she meant, but it still felt like a really big step so soon. I thought we should each keep our own space for a while, then maybe down the line, we could talk about moving in together. She just stared at me and said, "Don't you like me?" I was thrown off by that. I didn't get why she was in such a rush to move things forward. For the record, she was still living with her parents at the time. About 8 months into our relationship, she officially moved in with me. Honestly, she was at my place almost every day anyway, even staying over while I was working. My ex didn't really get along with her parents all that well. They were always on her case, saying she wasn't putting in enough effort, and they really wanted her to go to college. But she was pretty uncertain about that path. Back in high school, she used to talk about becoming a nurse, maybe even a doctor, but by the time senior year rolled around, she lost interest. She decided she didn't want to go to college at all, and that really pissed off her parents. They had saved up a bunch of money for her education, and when she said she didn't want to use it for school, it became a real sore spot. She even suggested they give her the money so she could start her own business instead, but they weren't having any of it. They gave her another year or two to figure it out, hoping she'd eventually choose to go to college. The plan was for them to help with tuition, living expenses, and all that with the money they'd saved. But when she stuck to her decision not to go, they ended up using the money to travel the world. I remember how furious she was about that. She ranted, "That was my money. They took my money and spent it on vacations. That money was supposed to help me get my life started." She even talked about suing her parents for blowing through what she saw as her money, never mind that it was money they'd saved for her. They hadn't even told her about the college fund until her senior year. They planned to surprise her, saying, "You don't have to worry about loans or anything, we've got you covered." But since she didn't want to go to school, when she found out just how much they had saved, she thought it'd be a waste to spend it on college. Maybe she had a point, I don't know. I figured a nurse would always have a stable job, but she didn't see it that way. She wanted to run her own business. So, when her parents spent what she considered her money, she was dead set on taking them to court. I'll be honest, I didn't care much for her parents either. They weren't exactly welcoming to me. It was clear they didn't think I was good enough, mainly because I didn't go to college. Even though I was making over $48,000 a year at the time, that wasn't impressive to them. To them, trade school wasn't on the same level as a college education, even though I knew my salary was only going to increase. In fact, now I make well over $59,000, and once I move into underwater welding, it'll be even more. I've seen guys in my field pulling in $85,000 or more, especially the experienced welders. I feel pretty good about where I'm at, no student debt and a solid career path. But yeah, her parents definitely had this bougie attitude. Her dad's a psychiatrist, and her mom's an interior designer who also teaches at a college. She was on the verge of becoming a dean or something, but they both acted like they were above everyone else. If you didn't have a degree, it was like you weren't even contributing to society. I completely disagreed with that mindset, and I was actually on my ex's side in that argument. They were a little too bougie for my taste. Honestly, if I had been in my ex-girlfriend's situation, even though I chose trade school, I would have jumped at the chance to go to college on their dime. You're telling me I could go to school for anything, and they'd cover all the costs? I'd be all over that. I'd figure out the best degree to pursue, whether it's to become a surgeon, go to med school, or maybe even law school. And all I'd have to do is focus on my studies. No need to worry about rent, groceries, or any of that. Yeah, sign me up. But she didn't see it that way. My ex wanted the money for herself, and honestly, I don't think she would have used it to start a business like she claimed. I bet she would have blown it on vacations or whatever else caught her fancy at the time, just because she felt like it. I mean, I've heard her talking with her friends about how she'd spend money, and I know she would have made some pretty reckless decisions. Her parents had saved up over $200,000 for her, plenty to get a solid degree, whether it was undergrad, postgrad, maybe even a PhD. She could have set herself up as a doctor or lawyer, something guaranteed to bring in a lot of money. But instead, she blew off the opportunity. That was just plain dumb on her part, no doubt about it. Anyway, after all her complaints about her parents and how they were getting on her nerves, I gave in and let her move in with me. Honestly, it wasn't bad at first. She didn't interfere when I was studying or working on certifications to advance my career. She didn't pester me for attention or anything like that. In fact, she was actually a good girlfriend in a lot of ways. She took care of things around the apartment, cooked, cleaned, all the usual stuff, and she had a job too. She even picked up the utility bills, which weren't all that much, while I covered the rent. She was pretty smart about saving energy too. If something wasn't in use, like a computer, she'd unplug it right away. She said it was just how she was raised. Her parents made good money, but they were incredibly frugal. They didn't show off their wealth, they drove older cars, cooked at home, and never ate out. I think that's why my ex loved eating out so much when we were together, because she didn't get to do it as a kid. Her family were big savers. So, for the most part, living together was fine. That is, until she hit me with the idea of opening up our relationship. Turns out, she'd been messaging some dude she knew from high school, one of those muscle-bound, tattoo-covered guys who rides a motorcycle. I saw their Facebook conversations, and she was telling him how she'd had a crush on him back in school, and now she liked him even more because he's, and I quote, so badass. But before I even found those messages, she casually brought it up one day while we were out at the park near my place. She said we were too young to settle down and that, even though she loved me and didn't want to leave, she thought we should see other people. She swore up and down that she'd marry me one day, saying, if I'm going to marry anyone, it's going to be you. But then she followed that up by suggesting we should date other people while still staying together. I told her flat out that I wasn't into that idea. Why would I want an open relationship? But she kept insisting that I had nothing to worry about and that it would somehow be good for both of us. It'll bring us closer together, she said, completely serious. So, after thinking it over, I told her, okay, we can try it. In my head, I knew I was done with her. I could just tell she already had someone else in the picture, or maybe she was even cheating on me. I couldn't shake the feeling. The way her face lit up when I agreed to the open relationship, I'll never forget that. I don't know if she had already slept with the guy, but that night, I decided to dig through her stuff. First, I tried her phone, but I couldn't get past the passcode. So, I went to her laptop instead, since I knew the code for that. I pulled up her browser, typed in Facebook, and it took me straight to her account, already logged in. I clicked on her messages, and sure enough, there it was. She'd been talking to this guy. His profile picture showed him flexing his muscles, covered in tattoos, arms, neck, everywhere. I figured, well, here we go. This is the guy she's been sleeping with. Pretty sure he was a tattoo artist, too. I thought, oh, great, look at this guy. So cool. Then I told myself, alright, let's read these messages and get hurt so I can move on. As soon as I started reading, it was obvious they'd been flirting like crazy. I saw that they had made plans to meet up, and this was before she even brought up the idea of an open relationship. She had been planning to cheat on me all along. As I scrolled through, it was a lot to take in. There were flirtatious messages back and forth, and then it hit me, she had sent him pictures of her breasts, and he'd responded by sending her a picture of his junk. That one really pissed me off. But at that point, I had already agreed to the open relationship, so in my mind, I was done with her. I knew I was never going to sleep with her again. I decided right then that when my lease was up, I was moving out, leaving her behind, and focusing on finding someone who actually deserved me. Sure, I'd told myself, well, she's not the one, let's see if I can still find my wife, my unicorn. But I didn't confront her about the guy or tell her that I knew the real reason she wanted the open relationship. I didn't say anything at all. That night, we slept in the same bed like nothing had happened. The next morning, I woke up and saw her folding clothes. I jumped out of bed, all cheerful, and said, well, this should be good for both of us. She smiled back and said, I think so, it's going to be great. Not long after, I ended up meeting someone new right away. There was this girl at the Starbucks near my job who had always flirted with me. I'd flirted back a little, but nothing serious since I was in a relationship. I'd mostly just accept her compliments. But now that I was in this open relationship, I figured I'd ask her out. So, I pulled up to the drive-thru, and sure enough, she was at the window. She greeted me with, hey, handsome. I responded with, good to see you today. When she smiled back, I realized, man, I've got a little game here. I've never been the kind of guy who goes around hitting on women or thinking I could get anyone I wanted. I wouldn't say I was insecure, but I wasn't exactly brimming with confidence when it came to approaching women. But after seeing her light up when I gave her that compliment, I felt great. I ended up writing my number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. "Call me," I said. She grinned and replied, "Absolutely, I will." I didn't hide anything from the Starbucks girl. I was completely upfront with her, telling her about the situation I was in and how my ex-girlfriend had suggested the whole open relationship idea. I made it clear it wasn't something I wanted, but since I'd agreed, I pretty much considered myself single and on the lookout for someone who could be my future wife. Starbucks girl was cool with that. She even said, "Well, hopefully, I can be that person, but let's take it slow and see how things go." She kept asking, "So, if I call or text you, your girlfriend won't get mad?" I told her, "Nope, not at all. I could even put you on speakerphone, and you could talk to her yourself if you want." She laughed and said, "No, that'd be way too awkward." I believe you. I'd have conversations with Starbucks girl right there in front of my ex, and at first, it seemed like she was fine with it. But then, little by little, she started getting jealous. One time, after I hung up the phone, she asked me, "Why were you guys talking about traveling?" To be clear, we weren't making travel plans or anything. We were just casually talking about places we'd like to visit someday. But my ex didn't like it. She snapped, "That's not what this is supposed to be. If you're seeing other people, it's just for sleeping with them or maybe going on a casual date, but traveling together? That's crossing the line." I reassured her, "I'm not planning any trips with anyone. It was just a conversation." Meanwhile, she was back in the other room, talking to whoever she was still chatting with, telling me she wasn't much of a phone person. I shrugged it off and said, "Okay, no big deal. I'll just talk to her outside if that bothers you." At this point, we didn't have much time left on our lease, and I knew that. She kept bugging me, asking, "Hey, are you going to renew the lease? What's the plan? Did you still want to move to a bigger place like you mentioned?" I played it off, telling her, "Maybe, I'll probably sign the lease again. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it, and stop bringing it up." And she did. My actual plan was to ghost her and move out without saying anything. I didn't feel like I owed her an explanation. I wasn't planning to live with her anymore, and I figured she'd figure it out on her own when the time came. Meanwhile, Starbucks girl and I had started sleeping together, and my ex never said a word about it. I didn't complain to her, and she didn't complain to me. I just assumed she was still seeing tattoo guy until it all fell apart for her. I started noticing she wasn't on her phone as much, and she wasn't sneaking off to make calls or send texts like she used to. Instead, she started grilling me with questions like, "Hey, you know we're still together, right? And this girl you're talking to, what do you really know about her? Have you two slept together yet? I hope you're using protection." It was obvious things weren't going so well with her and Tattoo Boy. By this time, we only had a month left on our lease, and I hadn't signed anything to renew it. The apartment office had already called me to ask if I planned to extend, and I'd told them no. My ex had no idea I had already secured a new apartment and arranged for movers to come get my stuff. The plan was to be completely moved out while she was away on a trip. She thought she'd come back to the apartment we shared, but nope, she'd come back to find an empty place. Before she left for her trip, I sat her down and told her we were done. She refused to believe it. During her whole vacation with her cousins, she kept blowing up my phone, FaceTime, calls, texts, non-stop. I could even hear her cousins in the background telling her, "Put your phone down, we're on vacation." But she was determined to make sure I wasn't going anywhere. I kept replying in texts, telling her we were over. I didn't want to be rude by breaking it off on FaceTime in front of her family, but I made it crystal clear through messages, we were done. She needed to get it through her head that there was no going back for us. I had all her things sent over to her parents' house, but I didn't bother to tell her. Honestly, I wanted her to come home and be completely confused about what had happened. Right before she left for her trip, she was telling me that we needed to end the whole open relationship thing. She thought I was getting too close to Starbucks girl, and that wasn't how it was supposed to work. So, I asked her, what happened with your fling? She tried to play it off, saying, oh, I never really had anything going on with anyone. I was just talking to someone, and it didn't work out. I thought I'd like this, but I'm not really into it. I pretended I didn't know she'd been messaging that tattooed guy from high school on Facebook and planning to meet up with him. I didn't even care to dig deeper and see if they'd hooked up, because according to her, she hadn't slept with anyone. She claimed she had only talked to someone else the entire time, and I'm supposed to believe that? That throughout the whole open relationship deal, she wasn't sleeping with anyone? I'm not stupid. So, while she was away on her trip with her cousins, I went ahead with my plan. I had her stuff packed up and moved to her parents' place. Why they never texted or called her to say, hey, all your things are in the garage, I'll never know. All I know is, I showed up with the movers, told her parents we weren't living together anymore, and that we were breaking up. Her dad just opened up the garage and let us pile everything in there. Meanwhile, I had my stuff packed and moved to my new apartment. I returned her key to the front office, got the place cleaned thoroughly, set up my deposit refund, and I was out. Whenever she FaceTimed me during her trip, I'd make sure to be outside in my car, so she never had any clue that I had already moved out. As I said, I told her before she left that we were done. When she asked me to close the relationship, I flat out told her I wasn't doing that. I was enjoying my time with Starbucks girl, and it wasn't fair for me to end things just because her fling didn't work out. I didn't bother bringing up the high school guy either, I didn't see the point. When she texted me, telling me they were heading back home and about to catch their flight, that's when I decided to block her. At first, I considered keeping the line open, just to watch her beg and plead. Maybe I'd get some satisfaction from seeing her reaction, the karma of it all. But honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't interested in petty revenge or any of that. So, I blocked her and cut off all contact. As for Starbucks girl and me, things didn't last. It got kind of weird between us. She started pulling away, and I'm not sure what caused it, whether it was something I said or did, but I noticed her backing off. I didn't chase after her, though. I just pulled back too, and eventually, we stopped talking altogether. I even stopped going to that Starbucks because I didn't want things to be awkward. Maybe she found someone else, but I didn't bother investigating. I just focused on my work and improving my skills, especially since I'm still determined to become an underwater welder. Even though I blocked my ex on everything, that wasn't the last I heard from her. Let me tell you what happened next. One day, I walk outside to my car and notice it's leaning a bit. At first, I thought, great, I've got a flat tire. I head over to the driver's side and, sure enough, there's a flat. But what I didn't see right away was this huge butcher knife. As I checked out the tire, I spotted a deep gash. When I pressed on it, it was clear someone had stabbed it. Then, I looked down and saw the knife just sitting there on the ground. I thought to myself, what kind of neighborhood did I move into? My first thought was that it had to be some local kids causing trouble because there was no way my ex could have found out where I lived. How could she possibly know? The same day I found my tire slashed, I got a Facebook friend request from a woman who looked like a total bombshell, big boobs, a real Pamela Anderson lookalike from back in her prime, showing off in a tight shirt. She only had about 10 friends. I didn't accept it, instead, I declined. But then, the same profile sent me another request, and then another, over and over, until I finally blocked it. Not long after that, I got another friend request, this time from another gorgeous woman, but she only had 4 friends. I blocked that one too. The requests just kept coming throughout the day, different profiles, same type of thing, and I blocked every single one. I was about to deactivate my Facebook entirely, but then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I thought to myself, well, that was weird. Later that day, I got my tire changed. I called AAA, and they took care of it. I was still thinking it must have been some kid in the neighborhood messing around. I even started asking people around the complex if there were any security cameras on the buildings, but turns out, there weren't any. I chatted with a few neighbors, and they were telling me, we don't really have that kind of thing happening around here. Are you sure you don't have a crazy ex on your hands? That made me pause for a second. I felt a little uneasy, but I told them, no way she'd know where I live. Later that night, I got another friend request, and this time it was from my ex. She'd made a new account, since this one only had 17 friends. It was clearly her. Out of curiosity, I accepted the request because I wanted to see what she was up to. As soon as I did, I jumped into the messages and asked, "You didn't happen to slash a tire today, did you?" No response. I typed her name, "Is this you? Why aren't you answering? You're reading my messages, but you're not replying." Then I noticed I had a bunch of notifications popping up on Facebook. I clicked on them, and there it was, she had been tagging me in posts. To my shock, she had gone full-on crazy, posting that I had domestically abused her and caused her to have a miscarriage. She was claiming I'd cheated on her and forced her into opening the relationship when she didn't want to. She even had photoshopped pictures of her face bruised up, trying to make it look like I had hit her. But it was so obvious that the images were fake. Even her friends were calling her out, saying, "This doesn't even look real, girl, you're acting nuts. What's with the new Facebook? What are you even talking about?" Thankfully, nobody was buying the garbage she was trying to spread. People started messaging me, asking, "Dude, what's going on? What's all that nonsense on Facebook?" That's when I deleted her and realized she had lost her mind. She'd gone completely off the deep end because I left her. I can only imagine the shock she must have felt when she walked into our old apartment and found it completely empty. Maybe she called her parents and found out all her stuff was at their place. I don't know how that played out, but I've replayed the scenario in my head 100 times. Part of me wished I hadn't blocked her, just to see her beg and cry. But in the end, I didn't feel bad. I didn't think karma was going to come back and bite me for what I did. I didn't even want an open relationship, but I agreed to it. I knew she was either cheating or thinking about it long before she even asked me. I wish I could have proven she slashed my tire, but she never admitted it, and I didn't have any solid proof. I thought about the knife, it had to have her fingerprints on it, but I figured they wouldn't arrest her or even bother dusting for prints without more evidence. So, I just let it go. It never happened again. I still park in the same spot, and she hasn't shown up since. I'm just focusing on moving forward with my life now, staying dedicated to my career. Honestly, I don't have time for women anymore, unless it's just for some temporary fun. I'm not wasting my energy on relationships or the idea of marriage. It's a huge waste of time, guys, trust me. You can spend months, even years, with someone, only for them to completely flip on you in the end. Why bother? Instead, invest that time and effort into yourself. Focus on becoming the best version of yourself, whether it's your health, your body, your career, or whatever you care about. You'll be so much better off in the long run. Thanks again for listening to my story. And man, you're absolutely right, invest in yourself. Keep your eyes on your career, your money, your health, and most importantly, on you. That's the best investment you can make. You'll come out ahead every time, I promise you. Look, here's what happened. This girl came into my life, acting like she was all in love with me, telling me, "Oh, I love your career, you're so ambitious, it's so attractive." She said all the right things. But then, when she thought she had a shot with some tattooed dude she'd been crushing on, suddenly everything changed. "Oh, I don't love you anymore, she said. Just like that, the feelings she once had were gone. It's ridiculous, and it's such a waste of time. Things can start off great, but they can end in the ugliest way possible. And of course, you'll hear things like, well, people have the right to change their mind. Sure, but that doesn't make it any less frustrating. Guys, take my advice, focus on yourselves. Seriously, put yourself first. Thanks for sharing this story with me, man.